Hi, and welcome to a brand new season of the Men on the Path to Love podcast. The From Reaction to Response, Emotional Self-Regulation for Men in Relationship episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. I coach men who are done suffering in their relationships, men who want deeper love, real connection, and to finally feel like themselves again. I help men become the best version of themselves and for their current relationship or the one they're ready to find, so they can live the life they love. So before I dive into this episode, I want to share something new. For Season 5, I've decided to take more of a thematic approach to the podcast. And the beginning of this season is all about foundations, doing the inner work, self-reflecting, developing a sense of self-leadership, and building the emotional capacity that's required for healthy, long-lasting relationships. But here's the truth, man. You can't communicate well if you are flooded with emotions or if you shut down. You can't repair a relationship if you're reacting all the time and getting defensive. And you can't lead a relationship if you can't lead yourself first. All right? So this season starts where real change begins, and that's on the inside. It's the inner work, as they say. And that brings us to today's episode, From Reaction to Response, Emotional Self-Regulation for Men in Relationship. And I'll start by being honest and transparent about my own journey. Man, I used to be very reactive, especially in relationships. If I got caught out on something, or if a partner brought up a concern, or told me I hurt her, or asked me to look at my behavior, man, I would get defensive, I would push back, I would deny, try to justify and explain and all that, and there was no ounce of humility in there. It was like all ego, man. No vulnerability, no empathy, just straight up reaction. And at the time, I thought I was standing up for myself, And what I realized was that I was actually protecting myself from the discomfort, from the shame, and from the fear. Yeah, fear of losing my ego, protecting my precious male ego. Well, everything began to change when I joined a therapy group. And that's where I first learned the difference between reacting and responding. So what is the difference, you may be asking? Well, I'm going to tell you. And listen carefully, because it can be a real game changer for you. I like to think of reaction this way. Reaction is automatic. It's emotionally driven, deeply rooted in old conditioning and old patterns, and it's subconscious. We're not fully aware. When we react, our nervous system takes over because we're trying to protect ourselves, right? It's a survival technique. We're not trying to connect. We're trying to survive. Now, response, on the other hand, is conscious. It's intentional. It's grounded. And it's value-based, meaning it's based on what's important to you. So responding means there's a pause. And inside that pause, there's a choice we get to make. And that was the big realization for me. I had a choice. But I can't lie, man. The truth is, I didn't always choose to respond. Why? Because much of my reacting was subconscious. The old patterns I had instilled over time. Just having insight alone wasn't enough. And what truly shifted things for me was learning about mindfulness and acceptance and commitment practices. And what I mean by that is, instead of trying to get rid of my anger or that defensiveness or control my thoughts or suppress my feelings or emotions, I learned to accept what was coming up. My thoughts, my feelings, even my body sensations. I learned to notice urges, but not acting on them. And I also learned to commit to acting from my values, not my thoughts, feelings, or my body. And I've talked about this before in earlier seasons in this podcast. This approach that I'm talking about comes from what's called acceptance and commitment therapy. The acronym is ACT. It was developed by psychologist Stephen Hayes, who I've had the pleasure of meeting, actually. He's amazing. And what I'm talking about here and what Stephen talks about is having psychological flexibility. It's the ability to adapt to certain situations, especially stressful situations. So let me break it down for you and show you how it looks in real life. The first thing is having that awareness. So say I'm angry, okay? The first thing is awareness. I'm noticing I'm angry. Okay? Then I become aware that I want to react, get defensive, yell, deny, what have you. Instead, I pause. And then I'm choosing to respond in a way that aligns with who I want to be, my best self, right? And what happened was I learned to train my brain to respond from my values, like I mentioned, what's important to me, instead of reacting from my feelings or thoughts in the moment, or even a bodily urge to have a tantrum or be physically aggressive. And man, when I got that concept of responding instead of reacting, that changed everything. But I got to tell you, and here's the important truth for men, and anybody really, it's not easy, man. It takes practice. A lot of practice. And I got to tell you, after all these years, I'm talking decades of practice, I still react sometimes. I got so much better at it, and yet it continues to be a work in progress. And this process is exactly what I teach my clients. A powerful example of this is Reggie, not his real name. Reggie was a hothead, man. And his therapist at the clinic where I work referred him to me. The good news? Reggie knew he was reactive, and he wanted to change, especially in his relationship with Charlotte, also not her real name. Reggie loved Charlotte. He didn't want to lose her, but he felt like he couldn't help himself from reacting. Well, the first thing I did was to commend Reggie for his openness. It takes a lot of courage for men to own up to that, right? That first step really matters. And then I normalized his experience. I told him that I used to be reactive and that a lot of men are, and women too for that matter. And in me normalizing his experience, he realized that he was not alone and that he wasn't broken. And when I introduced him to mindfulness and acceptance commitment practices, it was like a neon sign lit up in his brain. And he was like, I can do that. And frankly, I was moved by his passion, man. He was so excited to hear this. But I had to be honest with him. I told him, look, keep your passion and be patient with yourself. That it is a process and it takes time and commitment. A marathon, not a sprint, as they say. Well, in our sessions, we practice developing his watcher. In other words, the observing part of him, the part of him that was aware that he wanted to act out or react. We practiced visualization and mindfulness meditation, and we also did role-playing around triggering conversations. Over time, Reggie got really good at it, and something unexpected happened. Charlotte noticed, and as Reggie became less reactive, she did too. When one partner changes and the other one changes too. So here's the takeaway from Reggie's story. One regulated nervous system can change the entire dynamic of the relationship. Think about that. When a man learns to pause, observe, and respond from his values, again, from what's important to him, what matters to him, He creates emotional safety. He breaks his old patterns, and he invites connection instead of conflict and chaos. And that's self-leadership. Now, there's research behind all this, and in a nutshell, neuroscience says that when we're emotionally flooded, the brain's alarm system takes over and the thinking brain goes offline, a concept described by psychiatrist Dan Siegel. Basically, our brain shuts down and we stop thinking. And that's why it's so important to pause and observe before you react and regret it, saying something or doing something you might regret. That's what separates us as humans. Now, one very common form of reacting is defensiveness. I see it a lot, and I've gotten defensive way many more times than I'd like to admit. And man, when you get defensive, you can't rewind and delete it. And it can be really hard for the other person or your partner to recover from it, especially if it happens repeatedly, because they don't feel seen or heard or safe in the relationship. Well, according to relationship research by that guy you hear me reference a lot, John Gottman, he says that defensiveness is one of the strongest predictors of relationship breakdown. What that tells us is self-regulation of that defensiveness isn't optional. It's a key fundamental piece of the foundation of a healthy long-term relationship. All right, it's time now for my quote of the week, and it comes from the co-founder of Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, Dr. Stephen Hayes, who I mentioned earlier. He sums it up perfectly when we're talking about this psychological flexibility around reacting versus responding. He says, quote, "Psychological flexibility is the ability to choose how you act, even when difficult thoughts and emotions are present," unquote. That's what it's all about. Now, if this episode resonated with you, I invite you to sit with this question to reflect on. Ask yourself, where in my relationships do I tend to react instead of respond? Give that some thought. Be honest with yourself. And if you're ready to learn how to build this skill in a deeper, more supported way, well, that's exactly the work I do with men. You don't have to figure this out alone. Just visit my website, menonthepathoflove.com, and you can check out the many resources and options I have there. All right? And that's going to do it for this episode of Season 5, a brand new season of the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the From Reaction to Response, Emotional Self-Regulation for Men in Relationship episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. Thank you for listening. Now, coming up on the next episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast, I continue with the theme of doing the inner work. So I have a question for you. Do you ever find yourself pretending to be someone you're not or putting on a mask, especially in relationship? I was certainly guilty of that in the past. I'll share how removing that mask, the one I wore to appear to be strong, unaffected, or in control, when I removed that mask, that's when my true growth and freedom in relationship began. Coming up next, I'll explore how being emotionally reactive, what I talked about in this episode, is often tied to the masks men wear to protect ourselves, to protect our egos. Please join me for The Mask We Wear, How Men Learn to Hide in Relationships episode. And until next time, keep your heart open and stay on the path to love.